introducing Brian Simons with his Icebreaker speech. You have a title?
We'll call it Brian Simons.
Brian Simons. Brian Simons speaks, everyone.
So I grew up in Connecticut, which is one of those tiny states in the northeast of the country, which is here for you guys. I grew up in a house, my family lived in a house that was built in the late 1800s, which means that it was super drafty. And if you went down into the furnace of this house, down to the basement, we had a furnace that was enormous. It was like 8 feet on the side. I've never seen a furnace in a house since I lived there. And you would think that a furnace that size would keep a house warm, but this house was so drafty in the winter that if you turned the thermostat up, you could turn it up as high as it would go, and the house would hang out at around 65 degrees. I was good with that as a kid, because in the winter you can pile on more clothes, more blankets, and you're fine. It doesn't really affect you. The kids are always running around anyway. It was the summer that really was a downer. Somehow all that draftiness would go away completely in the summer. You could open all the windows and not a breeze would move through that place. Somehow in Connecticut it's still hot. It's really cold in the winter, really hot in the summer, and humid and still. And different people have different ways of dealing with that. My way of dealing with the heat was to go down to the basement of our house. It was an old basement, obviously. It was built in the late 1800s. Had fieldstone walls, a partially dirt floor, and it stayed cool, about the same temperature all year round. And I would, while I was in the basement, I would play with my dad's tools and build things, take things apart. Sometimes I put them back together the way they were, so they still worked. Usually I think I would break stuff. They got better over time. And that hobby, that way of dealing with the heat, I guess, led to my first job, which was at a rental company in town. And they would rent out yard equipment and party equipment. My favorite part was obviously messing with all of the tools that they rented out and rebuilding engines and helping people learn how to use that equipment. That curiosity of messing with things and building things kind of led to, well, I should segue now. My dad works in computers and did way back in the day, since the early days, I don't know what some people consider the early days, but I consider it kind of the early 80s. And he was deeply involved in assembly, programming, old digital equipment, corporation stuff. And he would take me to his work sometimes, and I got to see some of the things that he worked on, and I thought it was really cool. He showed me his data center back in the day, and back then, I think data centers were cooler than they are now. These days you have kind of LEDs, kind of obfuscating the fact that computers are kind of static machines with no moving parts anymore. Back then, in the 80s, computers were big and meaty. They had tape reels on the front, and they would spin, they'd go one way, they'd go the other way. You didn't really know why, but you knew they were doing something really cool. And I was blessed at that point, I think, to know what I wanted to do when I got older, what I wanted to do for work. So my first job at Easy Rentals, I enjoyed it, I was having a really good time, but I knew that I wanted to move more toward computers and systems engineering and design and stuff. So my jobs after that were all focused on that goal. And eventually I ended up getting a job that I was really excited about at a design agency. And it was a small company, maybe 25 people, and I was really the lone IT guy there. So I had free reign of their systems, and I had a great time designing solutions that would meet their needs. At a certain point, the iPhone came out, And as a design agency, they were very excited about mobile development and moving toward cloud-based stuff. So they kind of shifted their business, and I left for greener pastures. I had a great time. Moved to Peru for a little bit, did some consulting work. I got the itch at a certain point to come back and work with a bigger team of people. I'd been mostly a loner at companies from up until that point. So I got a job at a bigger company, which is more or less where I'm at now, giving more presentations at work, having a great time. I'm enjoying myself. I'm in the field where I was expecting that I'd end up, and that's what brings me here today, working on my speaking. That's my icebreaker. I appreciate you guys having me.